Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turnwheel, where today we are going to be talking about Rebecca, Dart, Geitz, Wallace, and Rath from Fire Emblem, The Blazing Blade. I am excited to be getting back into these. This episode, I think, is actually going to be a little bit of a shorter one because I was reading these supports and I didn't find myself having a lot to say about most of them. And it's been a while since I've recorded any SSS episode. So as I was reading, I was like, oh, these aren't that interesting, but maybe this is usually what it's like, and I just don't remember. But if you remember, we are going to be doing two SSS episodes back to back before the next main episode comes out. And I was reading the supports for the second one, which I'm planning on recording tomorrow. And I had a lot more to say. Like they were like way more interesting. I was like, yeah, this is the good shit. So for this one, I'm just gonna be. There might be some that I skip over. Generally not my favorite set of characters here. I don't really know where to start. Like usually I try to go from least interesting to most interesting. I don't know who I would consider to be the least interesting out of this group. Actually, that's not true. I have a pretty good idea. So I guess let's go ahead and get started. And to start things off, we're going to be taking a look at Rath. So Rath is funny because he only has 3 support partners, which I think is the lowest in the entire game by far. In terms of actual numbers of supports, I think he might still be the lowest, actually. I was going to say maybe some of the other characters have less supports than him because there are 2 characters that can only have 2. It's Pent and Louise. They can only have 2 support conversations with any person because they have A supports with each other. But I'm pretty sure that just in terms of the number of their support partners, they still manage to outdo Rath in terms of number of support conversations, which is really funny to think about. We have actually looked at most of these supports already from other perspectives, because we did Will already and we did Guy already. Those are 2 of his support partners, and we've done both of them in previous episodes. The only one that we haven't looked at yet is Lynn. So let's go ahead and start with that, I guess. So the Rathlin support is pretty good. This is one that ends in a romantic ending. So, take that as you will. I do think that they have decent chemistry together. I think Lynn, consistently, as we've seen across a lot of Lynn supports, she really enjoys the plains and really enjoys being on the plains. And in several of her endings goes back to the plains. So I think that having this connection with somebody, like one of the only other characters in the game who is also from Sakai, I think makes a lot of sense. So this is the support where we find out Rath's backstory, which is pretty sad. Basically, how it breaks down is that he was a little kid when one day I believe it was a diviner, or divin, I don't know how to pronounce that word, a diviner, I'm just going to say diviner. It sounds like diner. A diviner, or he said, you need to leave to prevent disaster, whatever that means. He was kicked out of his tribe essentially on the word of a prophet that he would go on to help save the world, basically, which is theoretically what he's doing. I don't know how him leaving his tribe has anything to do with that, especially since apparently, according to Rath, it's been 15 years that he's been traveling on his own, which, depending on how old you think Rath is, he couldn't have been any older than 5. But I think he was probably closer to 3 or 4, which is just fucking deranged. I don't know if it's actually meant to be read that way, because that seems ridiculous, right? There's no way that they just kicked a 3-year-old out of the tribe and said to fend for yourself. But maybe, I mean, that's textually that seems to be what's going on. So I'm not 100% sure. This support isn't even this support isn't super interesting in my opinion. I do think it's an interesting point of discussion for Rath's character, in terms of how he became such a so quiet, so reserved. He didn't really have anybody else to lean on, to teach him sort of that emotional, how to make that emotional connection with other people. So I think that has a lot to do with it. There's one other thing I want to mention about the support. I do think that it's interesting how Rath still identifies as a member of the Kutala tribe despite not, like, by all intents and purposes, he got kicked out, and has been living for the vast majority of his life, on his own. So by all rights, he should either, at the very least, not consider himself a part of the tribe, or in a worst case scenario, like, actively hate what they did to him. Especially since he's the son of the tribe leader, so, like, that level of connection to the tribe didn't protect him from being ousted in that way. But yet he still introduces himself as, like, I'm Rath of the Kutala when he meets Lin in Lin mode, which is just interesting to me. I think it says a lot about how Sakaans in general view their heritage and view their tribesmanship. I think oh god, what was the support from? Oh, what was it? Oh man, there was a support talking about, like, what it means to be. I think it might have been an FE6. What it means to be from Sakai, and, like, how people's, like, was it, like, this is gonna bug me now until I go find it. Hold on, give me a second. I can't remember if this was exactly what I was thinking of, but I think I might have been thinking about the Fur Shin support. There's some Sakaean support in one of the games, where, like, it's really driven home how important clanhood is. I was reading the Fur and Shin support, and I think it might have been what I was referring to, because there's a line where he asks Fur what clan she's from, and she says, I don't know. And, like, that's such an alien concept for Shin. And it's easy to see why. If apparently when you're kicked out of a tribe when you're 3 years old, you're still expected to, I'm just throwing the number 3 around. I don't think he can be much older than Lin, though. You get kicked out of a tribe when you're 3, and you're still expected to, like, to remember where you're from, and to, like, wear it on your sleeve, and for it to still be a part of your identity. So from that context, yeah, it makes a lot of sense why Shin would be like, well, what do you mean you don't know? That's interesting to me. I think it's a cool idea that's explored. Well, it's not really explored. That's the problem. It doesn't go far enough to be interesting, in my opinion. But it's the start of something cool that I enjoy. Okay, so the next one is the Will Rath support, which you've already looked at. And this one's pretty unremarkable, other than the fact that it's kind of funny. I like their interaction here, where Will is just, like, such a goof, that, like, even this completely stoic and unflappable Rath is, it's struggling to stifle laughter from how how ridiculous that Will's being. And that's just fun. I think it's cool. I think it's nice that it shows another side to Rath's character. I do think that, like, for a character that's very stoic, to use my previous word, to very stoic and, like, not very expressive, it's very easy for them to be boring, right? And for them to not show off, like, multiple facets of their character. And especially in a game like FE7 that doesn't have a lot of support conversations, and where a lot of the support conversations don't go into very much depth. You have a character like Rath who, like, doesn't show up in the story very often. There's no base conversations for you to get, shit from him, and he only has 3 support partners. So, like, and like his whole gimmick is that he doesn't talk at all. So, like, how the fuck are you supposed to convey a complex character with that to work with? And I mean, like, I'm not going to pretend that Rath is the most interesting character of all time or anything, but, like, I think that they did good with what they had to work with, right? They have like a character, a support where he shows a little bit of vulnerability. You have a support where he is, a little bit more of his lighthearted side, whatever of that exists. There's, some of the story content with him is, it conveys, like, his pride and his like attachment to his culture and his camaraderie with other people from his culture, with very few words. Okay, and last up we have the guy support, which is weird to say that considering we've only gone through 2 up to this point. Sorry, I'm just like, I just reread this entire support looking for like anything interesting to say about it, and I don't have anything, so I'm not gonna bother. This is not a very good support. I'm gonna be honest. I don't even remember what I said about it in the Guy episode, but it couldn't have been anything interesting. So we'll stop there with Rath. For all the comments I just made about Rath, I was kind of gassing him up a little bit. I don't think he's like amazing or anything, but I think he's a good encapsulation of like how you can do a character in a particular style that's easy, that like it would be easy to fuck up. I think they did it like fairly well. I think Rath's all right. Okay. Next up, let's do the next three are all kind of like, bumming around in the same area for me. Like, they're not great, but they're not super boring. We'll do Rebecca next. Rebecca supports with Will, Lowen, Sane, Dart, Louise, Raven, and Nino. Several of these we've already done, of course. The Will and Rebecca support is I hesitate to call it a comedy support. It is mostly just them dicking around together. It does end in a paired ending with them. But they also touch on Rebecca's brother, Dan, who Will went on like an adventure with. This is going to come up a couple of times because Rebecca's brother is a playable character in this game, which we'll get to. She does have a support with him. I guess we'll save that one for last because I think it's probably one of the more interesting ones she has. The rest of these are just like, Rebecca's so fucking boring. Like, okay, or maybe I probably should have started with Rebecca. I was like, okay, Rath's boring. Rath's pretty boring and only has 3 supports. So let's do him first. But like as I was kind of talking about Rath, I was like, ooh yeah, I can kind of like get into this. I can kind of see what they were going for here. And I can kind of get a sense of his vibe. Rebecca's just so fucking boring. Every support is basically the same, where there's like a guy that she like interacts with, and she like has very like basic boring things to say about them and to them. She gets mad at Will for being a dumbass, which is fair. Will is a dumbass. And then they talk about they briefly at the end talk about Dan. He went off on a journey with Will, but then they split up, and Dan was supposed to have gone home, and Rebecca like he never made it home, and this is like Will and Rebecca's first time like piecing together like, oh, something's not right. We don't know where this guy is, which is sad, and that's like how the A support ends. Like with both of them realizing that they have this shared loss now, and Will is like, okay, well, now that I understand like what's going on, and I understand that you've been alone this whole time, I promise that I'm going to stay with you and protect you. So overall, that support's okay. The Lowen support is honestly decent for Lowen. I kind of like a little bit about what it does for Lowen. I think it's kind of interesting for him. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about this one for Rebecca, so I'm gonna skip over it. She's like she clearly idolizes him, and like is very happy that he saved her village and has like a crush on him because of that. Pretty straightforward stuff. So I'll skip it. The Sane support I've already talked about pretty extensively in the Sane episode because I think it's fun for Sane. It doesn't really do much for me for Rebecca other than like, it shows that she gets easily swept up in her feelings and when Sane starts flirting with her, she starts to like catch feelings a little bit. I think she's kind of like she's kind of like a little bit of a romantic. She seems to be very interested in like someone like kind of sweeping her off her feet. That's the impression I get anyway. But they don't really, they do a little bit with it here, I guess, where she seems genuinely disappointed that Sane, turns out to be a dickhead. Although he ends up in a romantic support with her, which it doesn't make any sense to me. I'll stand by this. I don't think they should have ended up together. I do think there was another one that Sane had. Was it Priscilla? I think maybe it was Priscilla, where I think they absolutely should have ended up together, but no, instead they went with this one, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so next is Dart, but we'll skip that one. We'll do Raven next because we can blow through that one pretty quickly because I've already seen it. Rebecca, kind of being, flirting with him, etc., etc. And Raven kind of demonstrating that he does in fact have a little bit of a heart when she like opens up to him a little bit. And he is he kind of like instead of like shunning her and pushing her away, he I don't know he like consoles her a little bit, I guess would be the right word. So that's nice. I think it's good for Raven. I talked about it in the Raven episode. I think it's an alright support. Louise. Okay, so this is a Louise support, so it only goes up to B rank. The C support is Louise Rebecca asking Louise to teach her how to be a proper lady, which is a recurring concept in a lot of these supports, and a lot of like supports that we've seen up to this point. I mean, and Louise basically in the B support, Louise basically gives her backstory for meeting Pent. And basically the point of her telling the story is to show Rebecca that, like, because Louise wasn't like a prim and proper lady, she fought with the bow, she was pretty headstrong at the time, and Pent still fell in love with her. So the whole point that she's making is telling Rebecca, you don't have to change yourself to be with somebody who you admire, essentially, which is true. I mean, obviously she has a lot of romantic options, and most of them she tends to stay pretty true to herself, I would say. But the interesting thing about this, and I don't, we don't have to dive too much into this right now. We'll be doing Louise actually next episode. But I do think it's funny that Louise was 14 at the time, and we don't conspicuously never told what age Pent was at this time. But they do explicitly say that Louise is 14, which, I mean, like, either way, it would still be weird. But, it's medieval times, arranged marriage. The best we can hope for is that Pent was of a similar age, and not like 20 or whatever when this happened, but whatever, I guess. Nino is up next. Rebecca and Nino support is pretty simple. It's just them being cute and like becoming friends and supporting each other and doing nice things together. It's nice, it's definitely a very nice support. It doesn't really say anything super interesting about either of their characters, in my opinion. But it's still a very pleasant read. If you would like to check it out, that's what I'll say about that. Okay, we kind of blew through Rebecca here because her supports aren't very good. We'll do and then last but not least we have Dart, which is of course Dart is I'll just recount how the support chain goes. Rebecca sees Dart and immediately thinks that he is her brother. And then, like, obviously Dart doesn't think that he is. So that she's like, oh, okay, I guess it must not be you. I think it's the Will support where they go into like his backstory about how he ended up in this, but basically he has amnesia. The C and B supports are just them meeting and talking a little bit and having some cute interactions. It's nice. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm rereading this A support. This is funny. So Rebecca, it's in the A support. Rebecca, they're talking a little bit, and she's like, "Man, I'm sorry I keep bringing this up, but I just cannot shake. Like, you look so much like my brother." And he's like, "Oh, well, maybe. I don't have any memories from before I met Fargus." And she's like, "Well." She doesn't say this, but my immediate thought is, why the fuck did you not say that sooner then, dickhead? If she was, like, so convinced that you were her brother, you'd think that would come up at some point, right? Like, well, I mean, I guess technically I don't know that I'm not. Anyway, they do confirm there's, like, she's like, oh, hey, you should have if you're my brother, you should have a scar, wherever. And they check, and he does, in fact, have the scar. So they do piece it together, like, hey, I guess this is really happening right now. She does decide to keep calling him Dart, because she says, like, you're not Dan anymore. You're like a different person now, which is true. He's I think you could very, very much argue that he's a completely different person at this point. He doesn't have any of his memories. So the basis by which he's like, he's become, it's like a whole philosophical argument about like what makes a person who they are. Like, I think memories play a big role in that. And he doesn't have his old memories. So, like, I think it's fair to say that he's not Dan anymore. Yeah, that was her most interesting support, and it was still kind of mid. So yeah, Rebecca is not not doing it for me. She's not one of my favorites. I have to say. In fact, just like I feel like I've dragged this out a little bit too long, even just talking about her. So we can go ahead and move on to the next person. Who we'll do Dart next. I guess we'll go right into him. Okay, there are some good Dart supports here. That I that I'm excited to talk about. So first off, he has his support with Farina. And, you know, Farina does this thing. I think she does it with multiple other characters. We'll see more about it when we do her supports. But she essentially likes to compare salaries, you know, because she's getting paid 25,000. And that's like way more than anybody else is being paid. So, oh no, it's 20,000, not 25,000. And she tells him like I'm here for 20,000 gold, and he like laughs at her. He's like, "That's ridiculous. Why would you put your life on the line for only 20,000 gold?" And she's like, "Well, what are you like? How much are they paying you to be here?" And he says, "Well, I'm here because I have a dream. You know, like I'm fighting for myself, and that's way more valuable to me than money, which is based, and we stan. That's awesome." And then they get into like what Dart's dream actually is, and he has like an old musty treasure map that supposedly leads to a treasure containing 100 million gold. And Farina's like, okay, well, you know that is probably fake. Like, there's no way for me to verify that that's real, but I'll still buy it off you for 3,000 gold. You know, just on the off chance it's real. And I mean, obviously that, like, you know, even if it was fake, that'd be a pittance to risk for you know, just 100 million. To risk 100 million for just 3,000. But he says, like, no matter what you offer me, I would not sell it to you, because in his exact words, who would sell their dream for a few clinking coins in their pocket? Which is fantastic. Love that for him. There's some kind of riddle, and like I'm curious if anybody like knows what they think this riddle could be, like what the answer to this riddle could be. They should let me know, because I've read this over like a bunch of times. I really like riddles, and I was not able to discern what the fuck this meant. So the riddle is: the treasure lies on the other side of the door that separates fire and water. Dart seems to think that it's on the Dragon's Gate on the Dread Isle, which is like, I mean, that's as good a guess as any, I suppose. Oh, and there's something about the hidden white fang. Yeah, I have no idea. It's fun though. Is I like to think about where this treasure could possibly hidden white fang. You know, I have no idea what that could mean, but yeah, let me know if you can decipher that. And this is where it starts to get really... I'm already a fan of the support, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. Because Farn is like, well, what are you going to do with the money when you get it? Or she's like, she accuses him of like being in it for the money. He's like, no, I'm not in it for the money. When I find the treasure, I'm gonna bury the whole thing again and write my own treasure map and put it out into the world so that other people can go after my treasure. And like that's so cool. I like this support by itself does more to make me like Dart than anything else we've seen up to this point. I really like this support. It's fun for Farina too. I think it's a lot better for Dart than it is for her, but I still think she gets some fun out of it. So we can revisit this when we get to her eventually. But yeah, that's a fun support. I really enjoyed that. I didn't go through his support partners. So Farina is the first one, obviously. He also has supports with Will, Geitz, Rebecca, and Corel. So let's talk about the others. All right. So next up, let's talk about the Will support. Okay, yeah, and this one goes into like Will and Will also knew Dan. Obviously, they traveled together. And Will's like, "Oh, you're Dan." This goes into his whole backstory. I mean, I will say, I think it says a lot about Dart that he has this whole fucked up backstory where he like literally doesn't remember anything about his past, and yet he's still like a pretty like outgoing, fun guy, and has a lot of respect and love for Fargus. And like, despite that, this like the fact that there's this whole chunk of his life that's just missing from his memory, he's like, yeah, I'm cool, I'm chill, I'm living my best life. We saw with Farina that he has like dreams and ambitions, and you know, he's not letting that keep him down, which is really cool. I think that's pretty fun for Dart. I think that's all I have to say about this support. Actually, it's alright. It's pretty good. Next up, the Geitz support. I'm very excited to get the Geitz. Geitz is like a character that I really enjoy. The Dart support for him is pretty cool from what I remember. Let me just quickly reread it. Yeah, this support's really good. This support's really fucking good. So this whole time we've been talking about how Dart is like a very passionate guy. I mean, he has so much joy and has a dream, and he has a love for adventure and a love for Fargus and a love for being a pirate. And Geitz, as we're gonna see when we talk about his supports, is like an empty man. I think this makes sense to save more for when we get into Geitz in a little bit here. But like I think for Dart's part of this, I think like his nature as like this as someone who has like purpose and who has like things in his life that he cares deeply about, that really set him apart. That really sets him apart from Geitz in Geitz's mind, and makes him and makes Geitz a little bit jealous, which is cool. But we'll talk more about that when we get to Geitz. We already talked about the Rebecca support. Dart isn't particularly interesting in this support, in my opinion, so we'll skip over this one. And then finally for Dart, we have Corell. Okay, so yeah, the Corell support's funny. It's not particularly interesting for Dart's character, but I will talk about it a little bit just because I enjoy it. Basically, Corell goes up to Dart and says, "Hey, you travel all over the place. I want to know, who do you think is the strongest warrior in Alib?" And Dart's like, "Oh, well, that's a tough question. Well, I've heard stories about like this guy who's like really sick and he can do this and that." And Corell's like, "Oh, okay," and he just walks away. Or no, he said he's dead. That guy's dead, and then he walks away. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And the B support is the B support happens again. No, okay, sorry. It happens twice in the C support. Then the B support is him talking about famous people, like famous warriors that he has not, that Corell has not encountered yet. Because the obvious implication from the C support is that like he's like, "Oh, okay, who are some people that you," because the obvious implication from the C support is that Corell's like, "Oh, I'm looking for strong people to fight," and then Dart like gives him his honest opinion about who he thinks is the strongest. And Corell's like, "Well, I already killed them, so like that's fine. Don't worry about it." Which is really funny to me. The B support goes into some people that Corell is not as familiar with. He mentions Carla, not by name obviously, but like he mentions like a famous like swordswoman who's extremely talented and like looking for somebody from her past, etc., etc. He tries to get him he tries to ask him about like, "Have you heard the treasure of the Pirate King?" And Corell's like, "No," and then leaves, which is funny. And then the A support is just talking about the stories that Dart has heard about Corell. So it's like it's an alright support. It's kind of funny. I enjoy it. But nothing super interesting. Okay. That's Dart. Fun guy. I really like the first couple supports. As they went on, though, they started to get a little bit less interesting. So, not a huge fan of Dart overall. Again, most of these characters have not really been winners. Rath's been okay. Dart's been pretty alright. And Rebecca's been like super fucking boring. But we're moving on now to I know we're doing Geitz last. Because he's by far the most interesting character out of this group. Wallace is pretty fun, from what I remember. Let's let me take a look at Wallace's supports and see what I can remember about Wallace. Okay, the Lynn. So I think I want to save the Lynn support for the end because I think it's super interesting. The Wallace Renault support is pretty fun. Wallace apparently knew Renault when he was young. Renault's whole deal, we'll get into that like way later, but basically Renault's whole deal is that he's extremely old. He was like a grown adult when Wallace was a kid. And through the like circumstances that again we'll get into another time, Renault is still alive, despite the fact that he would have to be like probably like 80 to 100 years old at the very least. And And Wallace was like, he reminded me of this guy that I knew, and like he inspired me to be like a proud warrior or whatever. And they have like a nice relationship together. I think they're fun. It doesn't come out that Renault is in fact the same guy. Although Wallace is pretty sharp. Part of me wonders if he does eventually figure it out. The Wallace will support is pure comedy of Wallace trying to like basically get Will to shape up and do more training, and Will just runs away because he doesn't want to do it. Vida and Wallace, their support is also comedy. It's just them having like a dick measuring contest about how strong they both are, and eventually they like bring Ellawood in to try to have an impartial party decide which of them is the strongest. But like he says like, you're both equally as strong, and they're like, this guy's fucking useless. Which is, it's fun. I enjoy it, but like it's not. It's good characterization for both of them, don't get me wrong, but like there's nothing to chew on there. Like we already know that Wallace is deranged. Wallace is a little bit psychotic. So that one's not great. But his last two supports, Kent, who we've already talked about, and then Lynn, we'll talk about in a moment. The Kent support is, if you remember, Wallace recounts the story to Kent about how he was responsible for bringing back Lynn's mother, and he found them and caught up with them. But decided to let them go. And Kent was like, you betrayed your lord, how could you justify doing that? And he's like, well, sometimes you need to make the judgment call on what's right. And like, if you truly care about the people you're trying to protect, then everything else will work out if you do what you genuinely think is in their best interest. Because at the end of the day, if he had brought back Madeline, that would have been what Lynn's grandfather wanted in the moment. But eventually, he grew to love Lynn, and his heart, I think they said like his heart thawed or something like that. He ended up becoming a good guy, and having a lot of love for Lynn. And that's I think that's great. And Wallace, I think Wallace was playing the long game here. Like this is obviously my lord is very upset about this right now, but eventually, he's going to realize that he wanted what's best for his daughter. And I think that's cool. I think that Wallace really represents there's a lot of like loyal knight archetypes in this series, but I think that Wallace really does a great job of picking that apart a little bit and turning it on its head and having a new perspective on like what it means to be a knight loyal to somebody, and sharing that perspective with Kent in a way that I think is really interesting. All right, and then the Lynn support is one of the best that we're going to be talking about today. Maybe my number one favorite. I like it quite a bit. So it turns out that Wallace knew Lynn's dad, and obviously he knew his mom. It's not clear the relationship between Hussar is Lynn's father's name, and Madeline. It's not clear like how they met or like how they knew each other. But apparently Wallace considered him to be a rival. So they must have Hussar must have been maybe like a mercenary or something that like hung around Kaelin. That's possible. But either way, like he knew who Lynn's dad was, and Lynn is excited to hear more about her dad. So like building that relationship is really nice. But the B and A support is where it gets really interesting. The B support, they spend a little bit of time talking about the bandits that wiped out Lynn's family, and talking about how much she hated them and how much she wanted to get revenge on them, etc., etc. He even says like, how saddened the Marquess would be if he heard that a lady of Kaelin was plotting revenge. And she gets a little bit offended by that. She says like, how could I possibly like forget about what happened? Which is a reasonable response, I think. And in the A support, Wallace reveals something to her. I'm just gonna read this out loud because I think it goes hard. And I just wanna kind of read it verbatim. Wallace says, I had not thought to ever tell this to anybody, but I shall tell you and only you. I haven't told you how I came to Burn. You mean you didn't wander here by chance? No, not by chance. I came to Burn for a reason. I had a purpose. A purpose? The bandits that used to live in the Talaver Mountains, they are no more. I destroyed the bandits of Talaver. Why? Why did you do such a thing? The bandits of Talaver were my enemies. They were mine too. Lady Lindis, I killed them, but not for revenge. I want you to be happy. I wanted the single daughter of Lord Hussar and Lady Madeline to be happy. Lady Lindis, if you truly wished revenge upon them, you should be happy. Hatred can be strength. On the plains, you needed that strength to survive. But left too long, hatred can twist and consume you. The blood of your parents flows in your veins. That you live must bring them no end of joy. But for you to be filled with such hate, is this what your parents would have wished for? My words now might not reach you, I know that. Still, Lady Lindis, listen. I pray that your heart will not be clouded, for you have clear eyes of your mother, and in clarity lies beauty. That's just a fucking banger of a support conversation, and I think it goes crazy. And I mean, like, I think, you know, all of it's pretty straightforward. I think this concept of, like, this is something that actually comes up. I mentioned this way back, and I think the first episode of FE7, I had mentioned that I thought it was really interesting how the whole Talaver Bandits thing was presented in that episode. Because there's a scene early on in Lynn mode where Lynn talks about the Talaver Bandits, and she's like, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna kill all of them. I'm gonna kill every single last one of them. And both sent I think we're up to like 3 or 4 times now that I've done that. Kent and Sane, and also Will, and I think Florina, and also Mark, all 5 of them, because this is right at the Lindis' Legion chapter. All 5 of them were like, well, you better not forget me. You better not forget to bring me with you when we kill them all. And like, I think that that's like the interesting presentation of that type of story where, like, you know, it's obviously the story is not like pro revenge. I mean, clearly this support, you know, makes that pretty clear. Not that the supports are always in line with the themes of the main story. We see them contradict all the time, especially in like Fates, I think is a good example, but you know, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I think that this consistent portrayal of Lynn's anger as being not only justified, but also like in a way it helped her, you know, like revenge is what drove her on, right? Like if you think they never say this explicitly. I'm diving a little bit too into like the nitty gritty here, you know, if you might say, but I think you could very easily make this interpretation. Lynn might have like actually just fucking died, if it wasn't for the hatred that she was carrying in her heart. She might have, you know, to be a little bit morbid, she might have killed herself, right? She was devastated. Everybody that she knew and cared about either died or left her. And she was like completely devastated. She was completely destroyed emotionally. But she didn't. She, you know, she could have killed herself. She could have like not had the will to survive, you know, either just given up or just not been able to hack it because she didn't have like the drive that she needed to survive on her own for all that time. And it's not like she found another reason to live in the meantime. At the beginning of FE7, her entire purpose of leaving with Mark is to go get stronger so that she can go back and kill the Talaver Bandits. Like, that is her mission from frame 1. That is her entire life's purpose, is to kill these guys. Is the only reason that she left with Mark. And until she finds Kent insane and learns about her grandfather, you know, we're left to assume that that's the only thing that was driving her to keep going and to driving her to like move forward with her life. So the way that the story portrays that as like, yeah, you know, hatred can have its uses, you know, it's what kept you alive. It's what kept you going. You know, it gave you the strength that you needed to survive. It doesn't paint it as purely negative, which I think is really interesting. But of course, as Wallace says, if you let it fester for too long, it can turn you into a different person. It can warp you and consume you, kind of like, you know, what we saw with is it Helm? No, it's not Hellman. Housen, Lynn's grandfather, the Marquess of Kalen. You know, he had that hatred in his heart, and he could have he could have turned out to be an awful person, right? He was an awful person for a very long time. And it's only after he found out about Lynn that he turned around on it. So he's seen this happen in practice, and knows that the effect that hatred can have on people. So I don't know. It's interesting. I really like this perspective from Wallace. I like Wallace a lot. I think he's funny. And I think when he wants to be a deep and interesting character, he is. They can write him really well from both angles, which is great. He's like, I don't like him as much as Hugh. He's not one of my favorites in the game or anything. But he reminds me of Hugh from that perspective. As somebody who is like, part comedy, part like genuinely interesting character, which is, pretty rare. Usually this series can usually only manage one or the other, sometimes neither. So yeah, anyway, I thought that was cool. And I enjoyed that support a lot. It's one of my favorites in the entire game so far. And I like Wallace. And that was Wallace's last support. So we can go ahead and move on to Geitz is the last one, I think, right? Yeah. So let's find Geitz. Where's Geitz? Geitz. Okay. Geitz has 5 support partners. I forgot to list Wallace's, but I went through them all anyway. Geitz has supports with Dorcas, Karel, Isadora, Fiora, and Dart. We'll start with Dart just to get that one out of the way. In fact, that's the only one that we haven't done Fiora yet. We haven't done Isadora. No, we've done Dorcas. Okay, let's go through Dart and Dorcas real quick. Dart we already talked about, and I think this does a lot for Geitz's character. I think it shows like his perception of himself as being like this empty guy with no purpose, no drive, nothing that he cares about. And to see Dart have this passion, and this love in his heart for his ship and his crew and the people that he's with, that drives Geitz to be kind of jealous, and he ends up picking a fight with him a couple times, just to try to like kind of get a rise out of him and fuck with him a little bit, because he's salty about like the life that Dart has, that he wishes he could have. And I will say, something I forgot to mention when we talked about Dart's side of this is that at the end, Dart invites him onto Fargus's crew. Is like, you should join up with us. And I think that Geitz really, Geitz says yes. Because Geitz is looking for a purpose in his life. I think that's pretty interesting. I really like that. And then the Dorcas support I've talked about in the Dorcas episode. I like that it talks about how people like, in a way, Geitz is depressed and he's fucking, moping around about how he has no purpose in life. And Dorcas is like, bro, at least you can like I don't even have time to worry about what my purpose in life is. You know what my purpose in life is getting my wife fed, and taken care of, and providing for her. That's my purpose in life. I don't got time to worry about anything else. And I think that puts things into perspective for Geitz, as somebody who he's never really struggled to get by in that way. Okay, now let's get into the ones that we haven't seen yet. I think the Dart one is still probably my favorite out of all of them. But let's do Karel next. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the Karel one at all. However, I am going to. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to skip most of it because it's not that interesting. But there's a really funny line here at the end, where basically they've been fighting like back and forth a little bit. Karel's been fucking with him, trying to like fight him a little bit. And Geitz is like, "Stop being so weird. You sneak up on me like death itself. And wait, you're not trying to ambush me, are you?" And he says, "Fa." And Karel says, "Fa." And Geitz says, "Give me a straight answer. Fa is not good enough." And Karel says, "Fe." It's better to, you should read it, and it's harder to say it in words, but it's very funny. It's like one of the funniest lines in the funniest couple of lines in any of the supports so far, in my opinion. But the rest of the support isn't that good, so I'm just gonna skip over it. Geitz and Isadora's support is really cute. It's them bonding over this little bird that has decided to make a nest in Geitz's hair. And Geitz is like talking about how much he hates the bird, and Isadora, is like laughing at him or whatever. And then over the course of the support, and eventually the bird leaves. And they muse a little bit about like about how the bird was on a journey just like Geitz, and they're both just trying to find the place where they belong, which is cute. It's interesting, and I like that. I like that perspective on it. It's mostly just a cute support that I enjoyed. Okay, next up and last for both Geitz and then this episode in general is the Geitz Fiora support, which is where we get into Geitz's like backstory, his reason that he's like this, which is like one of the most important elements of his character. So in the C support, Fiora brings up the guild that Geitz was a part of, and Geitz gets mad and says, "I'm not a part of that guild anymore," and then they kind of disperse. Fiora then approaches him again in the B support and says, like, why do you hate your dad so much? His dad was the one who ran the merchant ship that they were on or whatever. He's like, why do you hate your dad so much? He seemed like such a good guy. And basically, Geitz explains that he found out that his dad was using, I guess not technically slave labor. He did hire the people, but he was working them so hard. And when they keeled over from exhaustion from working so hard, he would literally toss them overboard, to like get them off the ship, which is like fucking psychotic. Like not by the loosest definition, if you really want to split hairs, it is not technically slave labor, but like that's basically what it was. It was certainly unreasonable labor standards, I guess. Oh, and this is where we find out that this is the only place where it's mentioned that Geitz is actually Geese's brother. And yeah, so it goes into that. And I think that like all these supports together paint a really interesting picture of Geitz. I really like Geitz. He's one of my favorite characters in the game. Reading these supports more, like I definitely liked him a little bit less than I remembered. I think I was conflating these like two supports, like with Fiora and with Dart, as being like like being more representative of his character, as opposed to he has a couple of supports that are kind of duds. But I think that this paints the picture of a guy who is so thoroughly jaded about the life that he used to live, and now he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's like I hate like everything up to myself up at this point, and you can make the connection. I'm here. I come drawing the blood from the stone after I said that I didn't have a lot to say about these. You can make the connection here between Dart and Geitz really easily. Dart, as I mentioned, lost like all of his past. Like literally, it's all gone. He doesn't remember any of it. And he still manages to be a happy person who has a place where he belongs. Whereas Geitz, he has also lost his past in more of a figurative sense. He hasn't completely lost his memories, but he's severed his connections to his past. And as a result, he's lost and doesn't know what to do with himself. In stark contrast to Dart, who has managed to find a life for himself outside of the past that he knew. And I think that they have like a deeper connection on that level, which I think is really interesting. I'm a fan of Geitz. I think he's awesome. Okay. Overall, a pretty fun set of characters. Definitely my favorite this episode was definitely Geitz, and it wasn't close. I thought Dart was okay. I thought Dart was pretty fun. Honestly, I could see Dart like approaching Geitz. I think like he's a fun character. But the others, and while actually, okay, I wasn't giving these guys enough credit. I think this is a fun set of characters, except for Rebecca. Rebecca sucks. But otherwise, these guys are pretty fun. I'm excited to edit this down and get this episode out because honestly, I went in thinking like I don't have fucking anything to say about these guys. But I ended up being pleasantly surprised. So, yes, next episode, we're going to be talking about Sarah, Irk, Oswin, Pent, and Louise, and we're getting there. We're about I think halfway through This episode going up will mark the halfway point of SSS episodes, so actually we still have a lot left to go. Actually, no, not even, because I have Lynn, Elwood, and Hector here at the beginning of the list, even though we haven't talked about them yet. So we still have a lot of SSS episodes to go. More SSS episodes than main episodes left, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, Sarah, Irk, Oswin, Penton, Louise, and I should hopefully have a surprise for you guys in that next episode. So look forward to that. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. So have a nice rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.